The champagne flowed like water at the Pinnacle Hotel's grand ballroom in Manhattan, where New York's elite gathered for the annual charity gala benefiting the Visually Impaired Foundation. The irony wasn't lost on Blake Harrington, heir to the Harrington Financial Group empire and one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast. At 32, Blake had spent more than half his life in darkness, having lost his sight in a devastating car accident at 15. The crash that claimed his vision had also shaped him into the man he'd become, calculating, reserved, and perpetually guarded. Another successful event, Mr. Harrington, his personal assistant Melissa informed him as she guided him through the crowd. The foundation has already received pledges exceeding $5 million. Blake nodded, his expression unreadable behind his dark designer sunglasses. Numbers are the only truth in this world, Melissa. Everything else is subject to interpretation. He navigated the space with practiced ease, his custom-made cane barely touching the ground. Years of adaptation had turned his other senses razor-sharp. He could identify people by their perfume, their gait, the cadence of their breathing. In business meetings, he detected lies in the subtle shifts of voice that sighted people often missed. "Blake, there you are, you magnificent bastard, magnificent." The booming voice of Carter Wilson, his oldest friend and business partner, cut through the ambient noise. Carter's hand landed heavily on Blake's shoulder. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Blake's lips curved into a rare smile. "Carter, I thought you'd be busy charming potential investors." "I was, but now I'm busy finding my best friend a drink." Carter pressed a glass into Blake's hand. "Macallan 25. Neat. Just how you like it." Blake took a measured sip, savoring the complex flavors. "What's on your mind, Carter? You only serve me the good stuff when you want something." Carter chuckled. "Am I that transparent?" "To me, always." They moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, where the cacophony of social posturing faded into the background. Blake had always been grateful for Carter's friendship. They'd known each other since prep school, long before the accident. Carter was the only person who still treated him like Blake Harrington, not just as the blind billionaire. "I've been watching you tonight," Carter said, his voice dropping. "Same as every event for the past decade. You stand here, you donate obscene amounts of money, you tolerate small talk, but you never engage. You never connect." Blake stiffened. "I don't need your psychological analysis, Carter." "No, you need a challenge." Carter's voice held a mischievous edge that Blake recognized from their youth. It was the tone that had gotten them both into trouble countless times. "You've mastered the business world despite what everyone said was impossible. You've proven your father wrong 100 times over. But you've forgotten how to live, Blake." "I live exactly as I choose to," Blake retorted, an edge creeping into his voice. "Could you? Or have you just perfected the art of existing? When was the last time you took a real risk? Something that wasn't calculated down to the decimal point?" Blake swirled his drink, the ice cubes clinking against the crystal. "Get to the point." "I propose a wager," Carter said, leaning closer. "Something to shake up your perfectly ordered world." Despite himself, Blake felt a spark of interest. Since childhood, he'd never been able to resist a challenge. It was what drove him to rebuild his father's company after the old man nearly bankrupted it through reckless investments. It was what pushed him to prove that blindness hadn't diminished his capabilities. "What kind of wager?" Carter lowered his voice. "You've turned dating into a business transaction. Every woman you see has been vetted, comes from the right family, understands the rules of engagement. It's also predictable." Blake's jaw tightened. "Your point?" "My challenge is this. Find someone completely outside your world, someone with nothing to her name, someone who knows nothing about high society or corporate politics. Marry her, transform her into someone who can move in our circles and stay married for at least 1 year." Blake almost choked on his drink. "You can't be serious. Deadly serious. The Harrington name opened every door for you, even after the accident. I want to see if you can take someone without those advantages and help them succeed in this world." This isn't a George Bernard Shaw play, Carter, Blake said dryly. No, it's better. It's real life. Carter's voice took on a serious note. I've watched you withdraw further into yourself every year. You trust no one except me and Melissa. You assume everyone wants something from you. Because they do. Maybe. But you'll never know what genuine connection feels like if you keep everyone at arm's length, Carter paused. Unless you're afraid you can't do it. The words hung in the air between them. Blake's pride flared instantly. In business, in life, he'd never backed down from proving his capabilities. And what would I get when I succeed? Blake asked, emphasizing the when. My shares in Aperture Technologies, the startup's about to go public. Those shares will be worth $50 million by end of year. Blake raised an eyebrow. Carter had been raving about that investment for months. And if I fail? You give me controlling interest in the Harrington Tower development project. Blake considered this. The downtown redevelopment was his pet project, the first major initiative he'd spearheaded after taking over the company. You're asking me to bring someone into my life, into my home, as an experiment, to marry them under false pretenses. For all his hardened business tactics, Blake still maintained certain principles. Not false pretenses, Carter countered. Be honest about what you're offering: financial security, a new life, opportunities they never dreamed possible. Just don't tell them about our wager. Blake fell silent, weighing the proposition. He'd built walls around himself for protection after the accident, after watching how people's attitudes toward him changed. Some treated him with pity, others tried to take advantage of his condition. He'd learned to trust numbers and contracts, not people's intentions. You have 1 month to find someone suitable, Carter added, someone with nothing but potential, then 1 year to transform her into someone who belongs in our world. Blake's mind was already calculating the odds, the variables, the potential outcomes. It would be a challenge unlike any he'd faced. Not a business problem, but a human one. You mentioned marriage, Carter. That's a legal contract, not just some social experiment. Exactly. I want you to have real skin in the game. This isn't about hiring a coach for someone or writing a check. It's about genuine involvement in another person's transformation. Blake finished his drink in one swallow. You know me too well. You knew I wouldn't be able to resist. Carter laughed. So it's a deal? Blake extended his hand, his expression resolute. It's a deal. 2 weeks later, Blake found himself in Nashville, Tennessee, attending a business conference on financial technologies. He'd insisted on coming alone, with only Melissa to assist him. The challenge from Carter had occupied his thoughts since the gala, but he hadn't yet found anyone who caught his interest. After a long day of meetings, Blake instructed Melissa to guide him through the city's famous downtown area. He wanted to experience the music scene Nashville was renowned for, away from the sterile conference rooms and business discussions. There's a small venue to our right, sir, Melissa informed him as they walked down Broadway. The Bluebird Cafe. I've heard it's where many famous singers got their start. Let's go in, Blake decided on impulse. The sounds of a soulful guitar and a haunting female voice were already drifting through the open door. As they entered, the voice grew clearer, raw, emotional, with a quality that made Blake pause in the doorway. The singer was in the middle of a ballad, her voice carrying notes of both fragility and strength, telling a story of loss and resilience. What does she look like? Blake asked Melissa quietly as they were led to a table. Mid-20s, brunette, simple clothes, jeans and a worn flannel shirt. Pretty, but not in a conventional way. She has an intensity about her when she performs. Blake nodded, focusing entirely on the music. The woman's voice had a quality he rarely encountered, authentic, unpolished by formal training, yet powerful in its emotional honesty. It reminded him of a time before his accident, when he still saw the world in all its vibrant colors and imperfect beauty. When the set ended, Blake instructed Melissa to arrange a meeting with the singer. Minutes later, Melissa returned. Her name is Riley James, sir. She agreed to speak with you after her next set. Blake nodded, a plan beginning to form in his mind. Carter had challenged him to find someone outside his world, someone with nothing but potential. Perhaps fate had led him to Nashville for precisely this purpose. As he waited for Riley's next performance, Blake couldn't help but wonder if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, or discover something he never knew he was missing. Riley James clutched her worn guitar case as she approached the table where the mysterious man in dark glasses waited. Her boss, Mike, the owner of the Bluebird, had pulled her aside after her set with an offer that seemed too good to be true. A wealthy businessman wanted to speak with her and was willing to pay $500 just for a conversation. "Mr. Harrington, this is Riley James," a professionally dressed woman introduced her. Riley noticed how the man tilted his head slightly at the sound of her voice, and she realized he was blind. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his posture impeccable in what she guessed was an absurdly expensive suit. "Miss James, your performance was extraordinary," he said, his voice deep and refined. "Please join me." Riley slid into the chair across from him, setting her guitar case beside her like a shield. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Mike mentioned you wanted to talk to me." "Melissa, give us privacy," he instructed the woman, who nodded. Than stepped away. He turned his face toward Riley. "I prefer directness, Miss James. How long have you been performing?" "Since I was 16, Riley answered, studying him curiously. "About 10 years now." "And what has that decade brought you? Fame? Fortune? Recognition?" Riley bristled at his tone. "Not everyone measures success that way, Mr. Harrington." A slight smile touched his lips. "Fair point. Then how do you measure it?" "By whether I can pay my rent and still have enough left to eat that month," Riley surprised herself with her candor. "And whether the music I make means something to someone, even if it's just me." Pragmatic and idealistic simultaneously. "Interesting." He took a sip of his drink. "Tell me about yourself, Miss James." Riley hesitated. "Why? What is this about?" "Humor me. I find your voice intriguing. I want to know the story behind it." Something in his manner, perhaps the intensity with which he listened, made Riley share more than she'd intended. She told him about growing up in a small town in rural Tennessee, losing her parents in an accident when she was 17, and being raised by her grandmother, who had passed away 2 years ago. She explained how music had been her salvation through it all, how she'd been living gig to gig since arriving in Nashville 5 years earlier. "And now," he asked, "what are your prospects?" Riley laughed without humor. "Well, I'm being evicted from my apartment next week because the building's being converted into luxury condos. I've got about $300 to my name and no steady gigs lined up. But I've got a friend's couch to crash on, so I'm luckier than some." Blake Harrington nodded thoughtfully. "What if I offered you an alternative?" Riley narrowed her eyes. "What kind of alternative?" "I need a wife," he stated matter-of-factly. Riley nearly choked on her water. "Excuse me?" "Not in the traditional sense," he clarified. "I need someone to fill a role, to accompany me to social functions, to learn the intricacies of my world, to present herself as my partner to business associates and social connections." "So, you're proposing some kind of arrangement?" Riley asked incredulously. "Like Pretty Woman without the prostitution?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "A crude comparison, but not entirely inaccurate. I'm offering you financial security, a new life in New York, and opportunities most people only dream about. In exchange for 1 year of your life. A legal marriage, though in name only. I would expect you to learn proper etiquette, appropriate behavior for high society, and to present yourself accordingly." Riley stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she shook her head. "Why me? Why not someone from your world who already knows all that stuff?" "Because you possess something they don't," he replied. "Authenticity. It's in your voice, your music. It's rare in my circles." Riley stood up abruptly. "This is insane. I don't even know you." "Blake Harrington, CEO of Harrington Financial Group, worth approximately $2.8 billion. Blind since age 15 due to a car accident. Never married, no children." He recited the facts clinically. "You can look me up. Every word I've said is true. Riley sat back down slowly. Even if it is, why would I agree to this? Because you're about to be homeless, Miss James. Because talent alone hasn't been enough. Because Nashville has thousands of singers just like you all waiting for their big break. His words were harsh but not cruel, simply factual. I'm offering you a reset. A year of financial security and connections that could change your life permanently, even after our arrangement ends. Riley's mind raced. Part of her wanted to walk out immediately, to tell this arrogant man exactly what he could do with his proposition. But another part, the part that had been scraping by for years, that was tired of choosing between medicine and food, rent and electricity, urged her to listen. What exactly would be expected of me? She asked cautiously. You would move to New York, you would live in my penthouse, though in separate quarters. You would receive training in etiquette, fashion, art, literature, everything needed to move comfortably in elite circles. You would accompany me to events and be introduced as my wife. In return, I would provide for all your needs and deposit $1 million into an account in your name upon completion of the year. Riley laughed nervously. $1 million? Now I know you're joking. I never joke about money, Miss James. He reached into his jacket and produced a card, sliding it across the table. My lawyer's information. She can draw up preliminary papers if you're interested. The choice is yours. Riley stared at the card. Why marriage? Why not just hire me as a companion or whatever? Because I need people to believe it's real, he answered. In my world, appearances matter above all else. And what happens after the year is up? An amicable divorce. You keep the money and any connections you've made. We part ways. Riley's fingers closed around the card. I need time to think. Of course. He stood, straightening his jacket. You have until tomorrow evening. Melissa will contact you for your answer. After Blake left, Riley sat at the table for a long time, turning the business card over in her fingers. The proposition was outrageous, possibly offensive, definitely bizarre, and yet she couldn't simply dismiss it. She pulled out her phone and searched for Blake Harrington. Thousands of results appeared. Business journals profiling his success despite his disability, society pages photographing him at elite events, financial news tracking his company's remarkable growth. He was exactly who he claimed to be, which meant his offer was likely genuine as well. Later that night, in her tiny apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes, Riley played her guitar softly, trying to clear her head. The ceiling was leaking again, a steady drip into a bucket that created an unintentional metronome for her music. Her eviction notice lay on the kitchen counter next to past-due medical bills from when she'd developed pneumonia last winter. Her grandmother had always told her, when God closes a door, somewhere, he opens a window. Was Blake Harrington's offer that window, or a trap she'd regret falling into? By morning, exhaustion had settled over her, but so had clarity. She called the number on the card. 24 hours later, Riley found herself in Blake's private jet, flying to New York City. She sat across from him in the luxurious cabin, still shell-shocked by the speed with which her life had changed. Blake worked on his laptop, using a specialized screen reader, barely acknowledging her presence. Am I making a mistake? She finally asked, breaking the silence. Blake paused his work, turning his face toward her. That depends entirely on what you do with this opportunity, Miss James. Riley, she corrected. If we're going to be married, even fake married, you should probably use my first name. He inclined his head slightly. Riley, then. How do you know I won't just take your money and run? Or sell your secrets to the tabloids? The contract you signed has very specific non-disclosure agreements with severe penalties, he said matter-of-factly. Additionally, the money will be paid in installments contingent upon your fulfillment of the terms. Riley frowned. That's not what you said at the cafe. I simplified the explanation. The full terms were in the contract you signed. Right. Riley looked out the window, at the clouds below. Already she was beginning to understand the world she was entering, one where words had double meanings, and nothing was as straightforward as it seemed. "You never answered my original question," she said after a moment. "How do you know this? Isn't a mistake for you?" Blake's expression softened slightly. "I don't, but calculated risks are the foundation of my success." As the New York skyline came into view, Riley felt a mixture of excitement and dread. What awaited her in Blake's world? How would she navigate the unfamiliar terrain of wealth and privilege? Most importantly, could she maintain her identity, her authenticity, in a world that seemed designed to strip it away? The plane began its descent, and Riley took a deep breath. For better or worse, her new life was beginning. She thought of all the country songs about taking chances and leaps of faith. None of them had prepared her for this moment. "Welcome to New York, Riley," Blake said as the wheels touched down. "Your transformation begins now." The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Central Park and the city beyond. Riley stood in the massive living room, her small suitcase and guitar case looking pathetically out of place amid the minimalist luxury. "Your quarters are upstairs," Blake informed her as Melissa gave her a brief tour. "The staff has been informed that you are my wife and will treat you accordingly. Your schedule for tomorrow includes meetings with a stylist, an etiquette coach, and a personal trainer." "A personal trainer?" Riley questioned. "Your posture and movement need refinement," Blake replied matter-of-factly. "Physical presence is as important as appearance in my circles." Riley bit back a retort. She'd agreed to this arrangement. Now she had to see it through. "The first event will be in 3 weeks," Blake continued. "A charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. By then you should have the basics mastered." 3 weeks to become someone else," Riley murmured. "No pressure." "Not someone else," Blake corrected her. "An enhanced version of yourself. Your authenticity is valuable. It just needs polishing." As Blake left her to settle in, Riley wandered to the window, gazing out at the city lights. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, her reflection overlaying the glittering skyline. Below her, millions of people were living their ordinary lives, while she had somehow stepped into an extraordinary arrangement that defied all logic. "What have I gotten myself into?" she whispered to her reflection, which offered no answers, only the image of a small-town girl suddenly adrift in a sea of luxury and deception. The first week in Blake's world was a blur of appointments and lessons that left Riley exhausted and overwhelmed. Each morning began with a session with Catherine, the etiquette coach, whose perpetually pursed lips suggested she found Riley to be a particularly challenging project. No, Catherine sighed, for what felt like the 100th time. "The fish fork goes on the outside. How many times must we review this?" Riley stared at the bewildering array of silverware before her. "In my world, we're lucky if we get more than 1 fork for the entire meal." Catherine's eyebrow arched disapprovingly. "Well, you're not in your world anymore, are you? Mr. Harrington's associates dine at establishments where they expect his wife to know the difference between a bouillon spoon and a demi-tasse." After etiquette came sessions with Gregory, the personal trainer, who worked on correcting what he called her performer's posture into something more befitting a society wife. Then came Vivienne, the stylist, who dismissed Riley's entire wardrobe with a single glance before subjecting her to endless fittings for clothes that cost more than her annual income in Nashville. Blake himself remained largely absent, engrossed in his business affairs. When their paths crossed, he would inquire about her progress with clinical detachment, as if she were merely a project rather than a person. By the end of the second week, Riley found herself alone in her suite, surrounded by shopping bags filled with designer clothes she wasn't sure she'd ever feel comfortable wearing. On impulse, she retrieved her guitar from the closet where she'd hidden it. It felt out of place in this sleek, modern environment, much like she did. She began strumming softly, then singing a melancholy ballad about lost identity. The music flowed through her, releasing the tension and frustration that had built up over days of being told everything about her needed changing. "Don't stop on my account." Riley jumped at the sound of Blake's voice. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable behind his dark glasses. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't realize you were home. It's actually my home, he pointed out, moving into the room with surprising confidence for a blind man, though I suppose it's yours now too, at least temporarily. Riley set her guitar aside. I'll try to keep the noise down. That wasn't a complaint, Blake clarified, taking a seat across from her. You have a remarkable voice. It would be a shame not to use it. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Catherine tells me you're struggling. Though with the etiquette lessons, Blake finally said. Riley sighed. There are so many rules to remember. Half the time I feel like I'm studying for a test I didn't sign up for. You did sign up for it, Blake reminded her. It was in the contract. I know, Riley conceded. It's just exhausting. Being reminded constantly that everything about me is wrong. Blake considered this. Not wrong, simply unsuited to the environment you'll be entering. Is there a difference? A significant one. Blake leaned forward. I didn't choose you because I thought you'd easily assimilate. I chose you because you have something genuine that the people in my world rarely possess. The challenge is to help you adapt without losing that quality. Riley studied him, trying to reconcile the cold businessman who had proposed their arrangement with the man now speaking to her with something resembling respect. Why did you really choose me, Blake? There must have been easier candidates for this experiment. For a moment she thought he might give her a real answer. Instead, he stood up. We have an event this weekend, a small dinner party at Carter Wilson's home. It will be a good test run before the gala. Riley felt panic rising. This weekend, but I'm not ready. Catherine says I'm still hopeless with the table settings, and Vivian hasn't finalized my wardrobe, and you'll be fine, Blake interrupted. Carter is my closest friend. His gathering will be more forgiving than the gala. He paused. Consider it a dress rehearsal. After he left, Riley picked up her guitar again, but the music wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself wondering about Blake's friend Carter. And what kind of man would be close to someone as guarded as Blake Harrington? Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Riley stood before the mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Vivian had selected a midnight blue cocktail dress that was simultaneously elegant and understated. Her normally wild curls had been tamed into a sophisticated updo, and subtle makeup enhanced her features without overwhelming them. You clean up well, Blake commented when she joined him in the foyer. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his dark glasses exchanged for a more fashionable pair that softened his features. How would you know? Riley challenged, instantly regretting her tactlessness. To her surprise, Blake chuckled. Melissa described you to me, but I can tell from the difference in your footsteps. You're more confident in those heels than you were 3 days ago. The poor car ride to Carter's penthouse was silent. Riley rehearsed proper greetings in her head, trying to remember all of Catherine's instructions about small talk and social niceties. Stop overthinking, Blake said suddenly. You're not being graded tonight. It feels like I am, Riley admitted, like this is some kind of test. Blake's expression softened marginally. The people you'll meet tonight have known me for years. They're curious about the woman who supposedly captured my interest enough to prompt marriage. Be yourself, just the version of yourself who knows which fork to use. Carter Wilson's home was a stylish loft in Soho, filled with contemporary art and designer furniture. Riley's heart pounded as they entered, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Blake, finally! A tall, charismatic man with a winning smile approached them. And this must be the mysterious bride we've all been dying to meet. Carter, this is Riley, Blake introduced her. Riley, my friend Carter Wilson. Carter kissed her hand with exaggerated gallantry. Enchanted. Blake has been frustratingly tight-lipped about you. Riley smiled nervously. There's not much to tell. I sincerely doubt that, Carter replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Anyone who managed to thaw our resident Iceman must have extraordinary qualities. As Carter led them deeper into the gathering, Riley felt overwhelmed by the opulence and the scrutiny. The other guests, about 15 in total, were clearly members of New York's elite, old money, new tech fortunes, and everything in between. A woman approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Blake, darling, what a surprise to hear about your impulsive marriage." "Vanessa," Blake nodded. "Nothing impulsive about it. Riley and I simply preferred privacy." "How refreshing," Vanessa replied, her gaze sweeping over Riley with barely concealed judgment. "And what is it you do, Riley? Besides captivate our Blake, of course." "I'm a musician," Riley answered honestly. "A singer-songwriter." Vanessa's eyebrow arched. "How fascinating. Anyone we might have heard of?" "I doubt it," Riley said. "I was performing in Nashville when Blake and I met." "Nashville?" Vanessa repeated as if the word itself were distasteful. "How charmingly provincial." Riley felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, Blake's hand found the small of her back. "Riley's talent is exceptional," he said firmly. "I was drawn to her authentic voice in a world of manufactured personas." The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on Vanessa, whose smile tightened before she excused herself. "First rule of jungle survival," Blake murmured once she'd gone. "Show no fear." The evening progressed with Riley navigating increasingly complex social interactions. Some guests were genuinely welcoming, others clearly skeptical of the sudden appearance of Blake Harrington's unheard-of wife. Through it all, Carter watched with amused interest, occasionally intervening when conversations became too pointed. During dinner, Riley managed to use the correct silverware and maintain appropriate conversation, though she fell silent when the discussion turned to stock portfolios and vacation properties in destinations she'd never visited. "Riley," Carter called from across the table, "Blake tells me you're a musician. Would you grace us with a song after dinner?" Riley froze, looking to Blake for guidance. He gave a slight nod. "I'd be happy to," she replied, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. After the meal, Carter led everyone to a sitting area where a beautiful grand piano stood. "Do you play?" he asked. "A little," Riley admitted, "but I usually accompany myself on guitar." "I have an acoustic in my studio," Carter offered, disappearing briefly before returning with a high-end Martin guitar that probably cost more than her car back in Nashville. Riley took a deep breath as she positioned herself on a stool. This was her element, the one thing in this strange new world where she felt competent. She began with a soft melody, her fingers finding the familiar chords, then launched into a soulful ballad about finding oneself in unfamiliar territory. As she sang, the room fell silent. Even the most skeptical guests seemed captivated by the raw emotion in her performance. Riley closed her eyes, letting the music carry her, momentarily forgetting where she was and why. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before enthusiastic applause broke out. "Good heavens," an older woman exclaimed. "That was extraordinary." "Blake, you've been holding out on us," another guest added. "Your wife is genuinely talented." Riley glanced at Blake, surprised to see something like pride flicker across his usually impassive features. "I told you," he said simply. "Authenticity is rare." Later, as they prepared to leave, Carter pulled Riley aside while Blake was engaged in conversation with another guest. "You surprised everyone tonight," Carter told her, "especially me." "Is that a good thing?" Riley asked cautiously. "That depends." Carter studied her with newfound interest. "Blake isn't an easy man to understand nor to live with, I imagine. What made you say yes to his proposal?" Something in Carter's tone made Riley wary. "We connected," she said carefully. "Sometimes things just feel right, don't they?" Carter smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "Indeed they do. I look forward to seeing more of you, Riley Harrington." On the ride home, Riley was quiet, processing the evening. "You did well," Blake finally said. "Better than I expected." "Was that a compliment?" Riley asked, half smiling. "An observation," Blake replied, though his tone was warmer than usual. "Your performance impressed them." "Music is the only thing I know," Riley admitted. "When I'm singing, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not." Blake turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps that's the key then. Don't try to become someone else entirely. Use what you already know to navigate this new world." It was the most personal conversation they'd had since her arrival. For just a moment, Riley glimpsed something beyond. Blake's carefully constructed facade, a hint of the man behind the billionaire persona. Carter seemed very interested in our relationship, she noted carefully. Blake's expression closed off immediately. Carter is interested in everything about my life. It's been that way since we were boys. He strikes me as someone who enjoys games, Riley observed. Blake's lips thinned. We all play games, Riley. Some are just more honest about it than others. As they arrived back at the penthouse, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to Blake's friendship with Carter than she understood, and that somehow she had become a piece in a game whose rules she didn't know. The Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala arrived with a flurry of final preparations. In the 3 weeks since Carter's dinner party, Riley had thrown herself into her transformation with renewed determination. She'd mastered the basics of etiquette, learned enough about art and current events to sustain polite conversation, and grown accustomed to the designer clothes that now filled her closet. More surprisingly, her relationship with Blake had evolved. They weren't friends exactly, but a tentative mutual respect had formed between them. Blake had begun including her in some of his business dinners, and Riley discovered he possessed a dry wit that occasionally broke through his reserved exterior. "Ready?" Blake asked as they stood in the penthouse foyer, waiting for the car. Riley smoothed the fabric of her emerald gown, a couture creation that Vivian had insisted was perfect for making an entrance. Her hair was elegantly styled, her makeup flawless, and around her neck hung a diamond necklace from Tiffany's that Blake had presented to her that morning. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her stomach churning with nerves. "This is the real test, isn't it?" Blake adjusted his bow tie. "The first of many," he acknowledged, "but you've prepared well." In the limousine, Riley fidgeted with her clutch purse. "Will Carter be there tonight?" "Of course," Blake replied. "He's on the board of the foundation hosting the event." Riley had seen Carter several times since the dinner party. Each encounter left her with the unsettling feeling that he was evaluating her, measuring her progress against some unknown standard. His charm never wavered, but behind his easy smile, she sensed calculation. "Blake," she began hesitantly, "is there something I should know about Carter, about your relationship with him?" Blake stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly," Riley admitted. "It's just, sometimes I get the feeling there's more to the story than you're telling me." "Carter and I have a complicated history," Blake said after a pause. "We've been friends since childhood, but friendship at our level often blurs with business. Don't concern yourself with it." Riley wanted to press further, but they had arrived at the gala. As they walked the red carpet, flashbulbs exploded around them. Blake navigated the chaos with practiced ease, his hand steady on Riley's arm, giving the appearance that she was guiding him rather than the other way around. "Blake Harrington," a reporter called out, "is this your rumored new wife?" Blake smiled smoothly. "This is Riley Harrington, yes." "Where did you two meet? How long have you been married?" Riley tensed, but Blake handled the questions with diplomatic vagueness, offering enough to satisfy without revealing details. As they moved inside, Riley released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You did well," Blake murmured. "Remember, minimal information, maximum politeness." The Met had been transformed into a wonderland of lights, flowers, and elegance. The society pages would later call it the event of the season. For Riley, it was like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a very elaborate play where she wasn't entirely sure of her lines. As Blake introduced her to one important person after another, Riley fell into the rhythm they'd practiced. She smiled warmly, spoke carefully, and presented herself as the devoted wife of one of New York's most powerful men. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying certain aspects of the evening: the music, the art, the spectacle of it all. "Mrs. Harrington, you're a revelation," declared an elderly woman who Blake had introduced as the chairwoman of the symphony board. "Blake has always had excellent taste, but he's outdone himself with you." "You're too kind," Riley replied, remembering Catherine's coaching about accepting compliments graciously. The gala is spectacular. I understand you were instrumental in its organization. The chairwoman beamed, launching into a detailed explanation of the event planning. Blake squeezed Riley's arm slightly, his subtle signal of approval. As the evening progressed, Blake was pulled into a conversation with business associates, and Riley found herself momentarily alone. She wandered toward a quiet alcove, needing a brief respite from the constant performance. "Hiding already?" Carter's voice came from behind her. "The night's just getting started." Riley turned to find him watching her with that same enigmatic smile. "Just catching my breath, it's a lot to take in." "You're doing admirably," Carter said, offering her a flute of champagne. "Everyone's talking about Blake Harrington's mysterious, talented wife. You've made quite an impression." "That was the goal, wasn't it?" Riley replied, accepting the drink. Carter studied her, his head tilted slightly. "You know, when Blake told me he'd gotten married, I was shocked. When I met you, I understood his impulsive decision. You have something special, Riley, an authenticity that's rare in our circles." Riley took a sip of champagne. Blake mentioned that too. Apparently, authenticity is a commodity here. "More than you know," Carter agreed. "But I wonder, how authentic is your arrangement with Blake?" Riley nearly choked on her drink. "I'm not sure what you mean." Carter's smile didn't waver. "No, Blake isn't exactly the type for whirlwind romances. One minute he's married to his work, the next he's introducing you as his wife. It raised questions." Riley's heart raced, but her expression remained neutral, another skill she'd perfected these past weeks. "Love is unpredictable," she said lightly. "Sometimes you just know." "How romantic," Carter replied, not sounding convinced. "And convenient, given your circumstances before meeting him." The implication was clear, and Riley felt her cheeks flush. "Excuse me, but I should find my husband." Carter gently caught her arm as she turned to leave. "I'm not judging you, Riley. We all make strategic alliances. I'm simply curious about what Blake promised you." "His loyalty," Riley replied coolly, pulling her arm free. "Something true friends give, without conditions." She walked away, her heart pounding. Carter's questions had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Was their arrangement that transparent, or did Carter know something specific? She found Blake deep in conversation with two men she recognized as major investors in his company. He sensed her approach immediately, extending his hand toward her with unerring accuracy. "Riley," he said warmly, drawing her to his side. "I was just telling Richard and James about your performance at the Nashville Symphony fundraiser." Riley blinked in confusion. They had never attended such an event, but quickly recovered. "It was an unforgettable evening," she said smoothly. The conversation continued, with Blake occasionally prompting Riley to share details of their courtship, a fiction they had carefully constructed but rarely discussed in private. Riley played along, weaving the tale of their whirlwind romance with increasing confidence. Later, as they danced to the orchestra, Riley finally had a moment alone with Blake. "Carter knows," she whispered, keeping her smile in place for any watching eyes. Blake's steps didn't falter. "Knows what?" "About us, about this arrangement." He all but said so. A muscle tightened in Blake's jaw. Carter enjoys creating discomfort. Ignore him. "That's hard to do when he's practically accusing me of being a gold digger," Riley replied. "Is that what's bothering you?" "That people might think you married me for my money?" Blake asked, his voice low. "It's what most of them assume anyway." The casual statement stung more than Riley expected. "Doesn't it bother you that no one believes someone would marry you for love?" Blake's expression hardened. "I stopped caring about such things long ago." They completed the dance in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they moved toward the bar afterward, they were intercepted by a striking woman in a red dress. "Blake," she purred, kissing his cheek. "It's been too long." "Sophia," Blake acknowledged. "Riley, this is Sophia Alvarez, CEO of Alvarez Pharmaceuticals. Sophia, my wife, Riley." Sophia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. Wife? My goodness, the rumors are true. How unexpected. Life is full of surprises, Blake replied smoothly. Indeed it is, Sophia agreed, her gaze assessing Riley. I'd love to hear how you two met. Perhaps over lunch next week, just us girls. Riley recognized the invitation for what it was, a thinly veiled interrogation. I'd be delighted, she replied, matching Sophia's false warmth. After Sophia moved, Blake leaned closer to Riley. Be careful with her. Sophia and I have history. Business or personal? Riley asked. Both, Blake admitted. She's brilliant, ruthless, and still annoyed that I ended our brief relationship 3 years ago. Another detail you forgot to mention, Riley muttered. You didn't need to know. I do if I'm having lunch with her next week. Blake sighed. This is exactly why I prefer keeping business and personal lives separate. It gets unnecessarily complicated. Well, too late for that now, Riley replied, thanks to your brilliant plan. Before Blake could respond, they were interrupted by the chairwoman of the gala, who was accompanied by a distinguished-looking gentleman. Blake, darling, she exclaimed, Edward was just telling me how impressed he is with your wife. The fourth man, Edward, nodded enthusiastically. Indeed, I overheard Mrs. Harrington discussing Prokofiev with the symphony conductor. Her insights were fascinating. Riley froze. She knew nothing about Prokofiev beyond the name. She'd certainly had no such conversation tonight. Blake, however, didn't miss a beat. Riley's musical knowledge constantly impresses me, he said, squeezing her hand in warning. In fact, Edward continued, I was hoping she might consider joining our committee for the upcoming Composers Showcase. We need someone with her passion and expertise. Riley smiled tightly. I'd be honored to discuss it further. As the evening finally drew to a close, Riley felt exhaustion settling into her bones. The constant vigilance, the performance, the navigation of social landmines, it was more draining than any 12-hour shift she'd worked in Nashville. In the car ride home, Blake loosened his bow tie. How you handled yourself well tonight, he said, despite the complications. Including the conversation about Prokofiev that I never had, Riley asked pointedly. Blake's lips twitched. I wondered about that. Edward is known for name-dropping. To appear more cultured than he is. He likely confused you with someone else. Riley leaned her head back against the seat. This world of yours is exhausting, Blake. Everyone's either lying, testing, or manipulating. Now you understand why I value authenticity, Blake replied quietly. When they reached the penthouse, Riley was too tired for further conversation. She kicked off her painful high heels and headed straight for her suite. As she rounded the corner to the staircase, she heard the elevator doors open again and Carter's voice carrying down the hallway. Well done, Blake. She was magnificent tonight. The board members were completely charmed. I told you she had potential, Blake replied, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction that Riley had never heard before. Indeed, Carter agreed. I'm beginning to think I might lose our little wager. After all, Riley froze, her hand gripping the banister. The year's not up yet, Blake cautioned. There's still time for things to go wrong. True, Carter conceded. But converting a street musician into a convincing society wife in just a month, even I'm impressed. The Aperture Technologies shares might be yours yet. I never had any doubt, Blake replied confidently. Riley stood paralyzed, their words echoing in her mind. Wager, shares, converting a street musician. She'd been right all along. There was something more behind Blake's proposition. She wasn't an opportunity for him. She was a bet. A challenge. A project to prove some point to his friend. Without making a sound, Riley slipped off her remaining shoe and crept up the stairs, her mind reeling. Everything suddenly made sense. Blake's seemingly random appearance in Nashville, his outrageous proposition, Carter's intense interest in her progress. She wasn't Blake's wife, not even in the limited terms they'd agreed upon. She was a pawn in some twisted game between two bored billionaires. In her suite, Riley sat on the edge of her bed, still in her gown, as tears of humiliation and anger slid down her cheeks. The diamond necklace felt like it was choking her. She removed it carefully, placing it on the nightstand before burying her face in her hands. All this time she'd been telling herself that their arrangement was mutual, that they both benefited from the deception. She'd even begun to believe that Blake respected her, that perhaps they were developing something resembling friendship. But he'd never seen her as a person. She was merely the means to winning a wager. As dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline, Riley made a decision. She wouldn't confront Blake immediately. Instead, she would use the skills he'd paid to have her learn. She would observe, gather information, and plan her next move carefully. If Blake Harrington thought she was just a simple country girl he could manipulate for a bet, he was about to learn otherwise. The morning after the gala, Riley pretended nothing had changed. Outwardly calm, she joined Blake for breakfast and discussed upcoming events. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. For 2 weeks, Riley conducted a quiet investigation. She paid closer attention to Blake's conversations with Carter, noting subtle references and inside jokes. She observed Carter's calculating glances during social events. Through casual questions to Blake's staff and business associates, Riley pieced together a pattern of competition between the two men dating back to their prep school days. Elaborate challenges and wagers that had grown increasingly complex as their fortunes increased. Riley wasn't merely a wife, she was the latest round in their ongoing game. Her lunch with Sofia Alvarez proved unexpectedly illuminating. "When I heard Blake had suddenly married," Sofia had said over dessert, "I assumed it was another of his and Carter's ridiculous challenges. They've been competing since Harvard, always trying to outdo each other." Armed with confirmation of her suspicions, Riley implemented a new plan. Instead of confronting Blake directly, she would beat him at his own game. She threw herself into her transformation with renewed vigor, expanded her lessons to include deeper cultural knowledge, studied financial markets, and took a more active role in Blake's charitable foundation. Most importantly, she began cultivating relationships with key figures in Blake's world, not as his wife but as Riley in her own right. She used her musical talent strategically, performing at select charity events where her authenticity set her apart from the polished socialites. 3 months after the gala, Riley was no longer viewed as merely Blake Harrington's mysterious wife. She had established herself as a noteworthy presence, a fresh voice with surprising depth and genuine talent. The turning point came during a crucial dinner with potential investors for Blake's waterfront development project in Brooklyn. When an investor raised concerns about the timeline, Riley spoke up unexpectedly. "If I may," she interjected smoothly, "the phased approach Blake has outlined actually addresses that concern. By developing the public spaces first, the project builds community goodwill and increases the value of subsequent phases. It's patient capital, but with a stronger long-term return." The investors turned to her with surprise, as did Blake. She continued, drawing on knowledge she'd absorbed over months. "The data from similar developments in Chicago and Portland supports this approach," she added confidently. What appears to be a delay is actually strategic sequencing. By evening's end, the investors were enthusiastic and the funding secured. In the car ride home, Blake finally broke the silence. "You were remarkable tonight. Where did you learn all that about urban development economics?" "I've been reading your project briefs," Riley replied. "They're in your home office and you never said they were off limits." "I'm not complaining," Blake clarified. "I'm impressed." "I worked in property management for a while in Nashville," Riley admitted. "Nothing at this scale, but the basic principles are similar." "You never mentioned that. You never asked. There's a lot you never asked about me." "Blake?" At the penthouse, Blake poured them both a drink, a rare gesture signaling his desire to continue their conversation. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I didn't ask enough questions." "Why not? Wasn't that part of your project?" "Understanding." "Your subject?" Blake tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I know about the wager, Blake," Riley said evenly. "I overheard you and Carter talking after the gala. The bet to transform a street musician into a society wife. The Aperture Technologies shares. The whole game." Blake went completely still before responding. "It wasn't a game." "No?" What would you call it then? A challenge, Blake admitted. Yes, Carter and I made a wager, but that doesn't invalidate what we've accomplished. We, Riley repeated incredulously. There is no we, Blake. There's you using me to win a bet with your rich friend and me being foolish enough to think this arrangement might actually be mutual. It is mutual, Blake insisted. You've received everything I promised. Financial security, training, connections. Your life has been transformed exactly as we agreed. Under false pretenses, Riley's composure finally cracked. You let me believe this was a business arrangement between equals, when really I was just a pawn in your competition with Carter. I should have told you, Blake admitted quietly, but I was afraid you would leave, that you would see the wager as demeaning rather than challenging. How do you see me now? Riley demanded. As the most remarkable person I've ever met, Blake said softly. Someone who took an impossible situation and turned it into a triumph. Someone with more strength and adaptability than anyone I know. Riley stepped back from his touch. I need time away from you, from this whole situation. Where will you go? Blake asked, his voice strained. I've been invited to a music festival in Nashville next weekend, Riley told him. I think I need to reconnect with who I was before all this. Before leaving, Blake handed her an envelope. Information you deserve to have. Read it when you're ready. In Nashville, Riley finally opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, showing monthly transfers to a trust in her name, and documents transferring ownership of a small music studio to her. There was also a letter, written in Braille, with a typed translation. Riley. Words of apology seem inadequate, but they're all I have. Yes, our arrangement began as a wager, a foolish competition between two men who've forgotten the value of genuine connection. What I didn't anticipate was you, your resilience, your integrity, your talent. You've made me question what I truly value and why. The financial arrangements enclosed are yours regardless of your decision about our future. The studio is something I arranged before our disagreement, a place for you to create when we visit Nashville, which I hoped would become a regular part of our lives. What began as a wager has become the most important relationship in my life. I hope you can forgive my beginning so that we might discover what our future holds. Yours, Blake. After her performance at the festival, Riley was surprised to find Carter waiting backstage. Blake doesn't know I'm here, he said when she confronted him. I came to apologize and to give you context. Blake probably hasn't. Over coffee, Carter revealed a surprising truth. The bet wasn't my idea, Riley. It was Blake's. What do you mean? Blake approached me, not the other way around. He'd already found you, already decided to make you the proposition. He created the wager as justification, a way to explain his actions to himself. Blake Harrington doesn't do emotional impulses. He needs logical frameworks for everything. Why would he do that? Because from the moment he heard you sing, something changed in him, Carter explained. After his accident, he shut down emotionally, built walls so high that no one could reach him. He was drawn to you immediately, Carter continued. Your voice, your authenticity, your resilience. But Blake doesn't trust emotions, so he constructed a rational scenario, a business arrangement, a wager, a challenge. Even if that's true, he still deceived me. Yes, he did, Carter acknowledged, and he was wrong. But in all the years I've known him, Blake has never opened himself to anyone the way he has with you. He's questioning everything, his priorities, his business practices, his entire worldview. 3 days later, Riley returned to New York. She found Blake in his office reading financial reports in Braille. I read your letter, she said simply, and I had an interesting conversation with Carter. Blake frowned. Carter came to Nashville? He told me the wager was your idea, that you constructed it as a reason to bring me into your life because you didn't trust your emotional response to me. Blake nodded reluctantly. From the moment I heard you sing, I knew you were special. But I don't trust instincts, emotions. I needed structure. Why didn't you tell me this before I left? Because I didn't fully understand it myself until you were gone, Blake replied. Your absence clarified everything. And what have you realized? Riley asked softly. that I don't want our arrangement to be a business transaction or a wager. I want it to be real. Riley took his hand. Real relationships require trust, Blake, complete honesty. I'm ready for that now, if you're willing to give us another chance. On 2 conditions, Riley said. First, you cancel the wager with Carter. No winners, no losers. Blake nodded. Done. And the second? You let me help with the Harrington Tower redevelopment. I want to integrate community arts programs, music education, performance spaces, studios where creativity can flourish regardless of socioeconomic status. Blake's expression shifted to genuine interest. That's brilliant. It would differentiate the development from anything else in the city. Music saved me when I had nothing else. I want to create that opportunity for others. Consider it done. You'll have a formal position on the development team with real authority. Riley smiled without reservation. Then I think we have a new arrangement, Mr. Harrington. One based on partnership rather than transaction, Blake agreed. 6 months later, the Harrington Community Arts Center opened as the cornerstone of the Brooklyn waterfront redevelopment. It stood as a testament to their combined vision, performance, venues, education programs, and community spaces alongside affordable housing and business incubators. The project had gained national attention as a model for conscious urban development. On the center's opening night, Blake and Riley renewed their vows in a ceremony that reflected the genuine partnership they had built. Carter served as best man, his customary sarcasm giving way to surprising sincerity, to Blake and Riley, who proved that the best wagers are the ones where everyone wins. During their first dance, Blake whispered a final surprise. I've been working with medical researchers on a new procedure, a neural implant that might restore partial vision for certain types of blindness. I'm eligible. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Riley asked, overwhelmed. I didn't want to raise hopes unnecessarily, he admitted, and I've been conflicted. I've defined myself by my blindness for so long. And now? Now I find myself wanting to see your face, to watch you perform, to see the world we're building together. Tears welled in Riley's eyes. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'm with you. What had begun as a calculated wager had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared vision, and genuine love. As they moved among well-wishers, preparing to depart for a honeymoon, exploring the world's great music traditions, Riley reflected on life's unexpected turns. A bizarre proposition had led to profound transformation, not just of circumstances, but of hearts. Ready? Blake asked, taking her hand. Riley smiled. Ready for everything. And as they stepped out into the New York night, Riley knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with authenticity, resilience, and love. Fimda Historia, dear listeners, we hope Riley and Blake's journey has touched your hearts. Their transformation from a business arrangement to true partnership reminds us that authentic connections can emerge in the most unexpected places. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring unique stories that